I appreciate your both being here and your testimony. I will say some of what you have just said confuses me, at least as to the period 2014 and 2015. You talk about not having adequate information, I think very limited information for HHS to review. You talk about a lag in data. HHS had monthly financial data to work with. You received the, the quarterly financial reports, Q1 by mid-May, Q2 by mid-August, so there was plenty of time to put the failed co-ops on a corrective action plan or to cut your losses before sending them into open enrollment in 2015. So I just don't think that's accurate. It's interesting also when you say, Mr. Slavik, our strongest tool is to call the loan. You have a lot of other tools, and Mr. Cunahan actually has laid out some of those tools to deal with the co-ops. Corrective action plans we talked about, enhanced oversight plans, termination, of course. Ms. O'Brien, who's your co-op program director, told us these are all very valuable tools, and I know you're using them now more frequently, but our question is, how'd this happen? Throughout 2014, HHS did not use the tools at all with respect to these failed co-ops. In fact, 5 of those 12 co-ops we've talked about were never put on a corrective action or enhanced oversight plan, despite the fact, again, that you were receiving these regular monthly and quarterly financial reports showing massive losses. By the second quarter of 2014, 6 of the 12 failed co-ops reported net income losses that exceeded the worst-case scenario in their own business plans. By the end of the year, 10 of the 12 had exceeded their projected worst-case scenario losses for 2014 by at least 300%, $263 million. So I just don't think it's accurate to say you didn't have information and that there was a lag time that made it impossible to respond. It's just not accurate. The loan agreement says enhanced oversight plans should be used when a co-op, quote, consistently underperforms relative to its business plan, end quote. That's in the agreement. How could consistent monthly losses exceeding the worst-case scenario by 300% not be considered underperformance? I guess I would ask you that, Mr. Slavik.
Sure. Thank you. And these are, let me just start by saying these are very fair and appropriate questions, and they're questions that I have asked myself to go back and look at 2014. Obviously, this was a lot of this before my time. You know, you may remember that 2014 in the exchanges got off to what I might charitably call a slow start. Open enrollment had to be extended, and so membership didn't start to come in till late. And then, of course, the way health insurance works, people have deductibles, so claim filings don't start to happen for a while. And as Mr. Cunahan described, you know, you don't really get an accurate picture. And look, I've been in this business a long time. You don't really get a good, accurate picture. Certainly, in my view, the question I ask is, did the people on the co-op team have enough information to effectively shut down a co-op or call a loan? Because if they did not continue to disperse a loan, they would in effect put the plan out of compliance. And then obviously the kind of situation that we had in Nebraska and Iowa is not the kind of situation we wanted to be in. And I will say, to be fair, as I look back and about things we would have done differently, I will say that co-opportunity should never have been allowed to go into the 2015 year, either by the co-op or by ourselves. And I think that's a very fair criticism in looking back, and I think that's something that we would all say. When I look at the other co-ops, and I look at all the evaluations, notwithstanding that many of them were ahead of their business plan on membership, some were behind, I can tell you that the expression that once you have your first customer, your business plan goes out the window is very true. And in this case, the team, I think, did the best job they could evaluating the information they had. But 6 months into a co-op being off the ground, the startup, when I look at it, and again, this is a reasonable person could reach a different judgment, but when I look at it, I look at these co-op teams, I find it very difficult to criticize them, with the exception of Co-Opportunity, for not closing those, for letting those co-ops move forward into the 2015 open enrollment year, reset their pricing, which was allotted to them and approved by the Departments of Insurance, who also thought they should move in, and to move forward and see what happened in 2015. Obviously, looking back on judgment today, we have information we didn't have then about how their claims developed, and I think that's why these are very fair questions. I don't know, Mr. Kuhn, Kevin, if you want to add anything.
I guess what I would just add is, based on my experience, startup health insurance companies are very, very high risk. Over half of them fail. They take 3 to 5 years to stabilize and mature. It's seductive to look back and say, look at what happened after a certain amount of period, and say, you should have done something here, and but it takes. If you look at open enrollment, for example, at that period, and when it ended, it took us until October into November to actually have any credible experience, because in the first 3 months there's literally very modest utilization, and then it continues to get a little bit better in the fourth and fifth and sixth months, which is one of the reasons when issuers set their rates for 2015, they were setting their rates on manual rates, not based on experience. 2016 was the first year in which issuers actually had credible claims experience to set their rates from. So again, a lot of different factors. It's dynamic and it's complicated.
Yeah, look, I know you weren't there, but I just think it is totally inappropriate for you all to say, as Mr. Slavitt just did, they did the best job they could with the information they had, and that somehow, this is just a problem with startups. First of all, we're talking about taxpayer money. $1.2 billion certainly lost. 700,000 people plus losing their health care. And somehow you guys seem to be saying that's just fine. In terms of startups, these co-ops failed at a much higher rate than the average startup. In fact, they did that despite the fact that they had something that no startup I ever known has, which is millions of dollars in subsidized government loans. You say you've been in business a while. I mean, wouldn't you have loved to have those millions of dollars in subsidized loans? You say that didn't have information. Let's talk about that. By March 2014, 2 of the co-ops, this is 2014, Co-Opportunity and New York Co-op had already exceeded their high enrollment projections for the year. We talked about that as being one of the data points you're supposed to look at. They exceeded their scenario by more than 150% within the first month of enrollment. By the end of March 2014, New York Co-op had more than double the high enrollment scenario in its feasibility study. There was plenty of information out there, and again, you weren't there. I'm not blaming you personally, but for HHS not to take some responsibility here and accountability, were there any objective standards for deciding when underperformance would trigger an enhanced oversight plan?
Yes.
And what were those?
Well, it depended. There was a series, Mr. Chairman, of what those could be. But one thing I would just like to note to you.
No, but what were the objective? Because let me just tell you something, so I'm not surprising you. And again, we gave you guys this report to look at, okay? Yep. And we're trying to be fair here. It's a thorough report. Yep. You gave us some comments. We took your comments. Yep. But here's what we heard from the person who is in charge of the co-op program, the co-op director. She told the subcommittee there was no standard. No standard, no objective standard. She said there still isn't a standard, by the way. It's done on an ad hoc basis. That's information that we have. So to say that there is and was an objective standard for deciding when a performance should trigger an enhanced oversight plan, that's not what we learned. So, as manager of this $2.4 billion portfolio, don't you think it would have been good to have some kind of a metric to decide when enhanced oversight was appropriate?
Yeah. So, thank you. And the thing that I would say is what I think the team does goes a level further than just having a standard rote plan. They really get into these businesses because they are in such an early and precarious stage. And as Kevin described, we send our teams out into the field, not just to evaluate, but to provide technical assistance and the best advice that we can relative to how these co-ops perform. I will tell you that even when we put a co-op on a enhanced oversight plan, it's not a silver bullet, because the reality is the co-ops themselves have to perform. They have to price right, they have to have a good enrollment strategy, they have to sell, they have to service, and the departments of insurance are watching them every step of the way to make sure that they are doing it right. And I think everybody watches this with a set of nervousness because these are such early and precarious operations. So it is absolutely, at least, and I can speak more to the time since I've been here and since Kevin's been here, it's been a very intense activity.
Let me just, not to interrupt, we're talking about 2014 and into 2015.
Yep.
And, I don't know what the level of losses needed to be. Certainly 300% wasn't enough. But you did not have standards in place that enabled you to react quickly enough to be able to save this hemorrhaging of taxpayer dollars and the dislocation to all those patients who lost their health care.